Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm really excited for the guest that I have on today. He's going to share a lot about his journey, a lot about his documentary that's out on Netflix. You can watch it there, and also about his journey as a parent. But he and I run kind of similar lines as far as the coaching world goes, and we're going to get into all that as well. But my good friend, Coach Bill Courtney, has joined me on Dad Up. Welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks, bud.
Appreciate you being on. I know we chatted a little bit before the show got recording, but for my viewers, listeners who may not know who you are, let's dive into a back history of you, kind of how you grew up, how you got into the business you're doing, but also how you got into coaching and the documentary. Let's just dive all into it. And then more importantly, let's talk about your family as well.
Sounds good. I'm from Memphis, born and raised. Dad and mom were divorced when I was 4. Mom was married and divorced 5 times. My 4th father shot at me down a hallway with a .38 caliber pistol, and I had to dive out a window to save myself that day. So I grew up. I had 2 grandfathers that were good men, but I grew up in a challenging family environment. And I lettered in 6 sports in high school. And the best people I knew were my coaches. And so at 17 years old, I went to Ole Miss. And while there, majored in psychology and English. And the older I got and the closer I got to graduation, the more and more I just felt called to coach. And the reason is because the greatest men in my life were coaches, and I had a real dichotomy of experience about what good men and bad men could look like in the life of a young man trying to figure it out. So while I was working on my doctorate, I started teaching and coaching, married Lisa, and I'm a fat redheaded guy and she is a dime. And so in the South, when you light into a slab, you try to figure out how to keep her on the hook. So I just started having kids, and we had 4 kids in 4 years, and 4 kids in 4 years on $17,000 a year as a teacher and a coach with no insurance wasn't getting it. So I went into the private world, but coaching was still my passion. And so in the state of Tennessee, you can go get some accreditation and be what's called a non-faculty certified coach, meaning the state certified, not like just a quote volunteer coach, which there's nothing wrong with that, but to teach in the public school system and to coach in the public school system, you have to have this accreditation. And I got it. There's not that many of us in the state, but I was one of them. And so I continued to coach. So I quit it as a profession, but for 32 years, I coached every single year, and got lucky, started a business with $17,000. Now we have about 140 employees. We do business in 42 different countries, have a 45-acre manufacturing facility in Memphis, have offices in Shanghai and Ho Chi Minh, and the Lord has blessed me richly in business, far more than I deserve. And at the same time, raised my family, at the same time coached. And the reason I ended up at Manassas, which is where the school is that's documented in the movie, is because it's close. It was a half mile from my business, and the opportunity came over to coach there. When I got there, there were 17 kids on a varsity football team that had won 4 games in 10 years. They were 4-95, and the movie Undefeated documents our last year, which was my 7th year there. We had 75 kids on the team, and our last 2 years record was 18-2. And so that is what ended up being the Academy Award in the movie. And from there, I really thought I had my moment in fame. I mean, my 20 minutes, I'm a lumberman and a football coach, and from Memphis, and okay, that was great. That was a lot of fun, cool experience. And I expected to go back here and live my life, and the calls never quit. The opportunities never quit. And Lisa and I really decided, if the blessing of all of this is a platform to talk about the things that matter, then it would be wrong not to use that platform to try to exact some measure of change. And so started doing speeches, and then from the speeches came a book deal, and I wrote Against the Grain, which has done extraordinarily well, and then continued the speeches, and then that led into TV appearances and all that stuff, and then ultimately the podcast that we launched about 3 weeks ago, which amazingly is in the top 20 in the world on Apple. And so I don't know if I went too long, but there's kind of from where I was 4 years old to now. I hope you got it all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. You have 4 kids. What are their ages?
Their ages are now 27, 26, 25, and 24, meaning they at one time were 3, 4, 5, and 6, while I'm working, building a business, coaching football and everything else. And Lisa doesn't get the press, but she sure deserves the medal.
Right. Absolutely. Amen to that. Well, that's awesome. Your journey is incredible. And for those of you out there that have not only not been a coach, but been a parent that is a coach, and trying to work a career like he's trying to build a business, it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of hours that you're missing of sleep because you're focused on the next practice, the next game, and for him trying to grow his business as well, what's going to happen the next day with his company. It's a lot of work. And like you said, credit to our wives. We call our wives coach's widow, because we don't hardly ever see them. We're working our day jobs, and then we're gone all night at practices or games. So I know that system far too well. And I coached for over 20 years at various levels, from rec ball all the way up through high school. And it was just, it's tiring. It's tiring.
It is. And it's exhausting for a spouse.
Right.
It takes, it's not a commitment of one, it's a commitment of a family to be able to do what it takes to do it and do it right. And so the vision and the calling to not only coach, but to mentor and to hopefully provide a positive experience for the kids under your charge, it really does start at home. And if you don't get it right at home, you will fail on the field. And my wife is not only my best friend, but she without her, none of what I am today happens. And I think people say that a lot, and I don't want to sensationalize any of that. And I want you to know that's not some all shucks false Southern humility. That is a real thing. Lisa is an incredible woman to have allowed me the ability to do all of what I've done while she had 4 screaming kids at home. So phenomenal effort on our family's part.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. And it's interesting because I had an experience that, and we're going to get into fatherhood and all that other stuff, but coaching right now is just kind of on my mind because it was something that was part of my life so much. But I had a point in my time where my kids had gone off to high school, or were going into that high school. They're transitioning into that high school area. And I decided, okay, I'm done coaching because I'm not going to coach at the high school level. I'm done coaching. And I essentially, hung up the whistle for about 6 months or so, 8 months. And I was watching my boys play at the high school level, and I was going to every single one of their practices, every single one of their games, just watching them, loving it. And I wasn't getting involved. I wasn't interfering with the coach. I was just a spectator. And the head coach came over to me one day. We started to become friends. He came over to me one day and he said, "Why don't you help me coach?" And I said, I don't know. I don't know that my boys would like it. And I've never coached the high school level before. And he goes, listen, you're here every single practice. You're here every single game. You might as well help me. I could use an extra hand. And so I asked my boys and they're like, hey, you do what you want to do. If that's what you want to do, do it. But the important thing was I went to my wife and I said, hey, I've had this opportunity to come up to be a coach at the boys' high school. And I want to know if you're okay with it. And she's like, you don't have to ask my permission. I said, no, I do, because it means time away from you and us not being together. And it's going to be a commitment. And she said, listen, you're passionate about coaching. You need to go do it. If this is what you want to do, I want you to go do it. And so I did for about 4.5 years. I continued to coach basketball was the sport. And I have to tell you something. That first year that I coached at the high school level, this is a private Christian school that has about 400 students. So you can see that our talent pool is very small. But prior to me coming on board with this other coach, they had won in the last 2 or 3 seasons, they had won a total of 3 games in the last 2 and 3 seasons. And then the first year I came on, we not only qualified to get into CIF playoffs, but we made it to the championship game and we won the championship game, CIF championship. And it was the first time in the school's 100-year history that they had achieved that level of success in sports. And now my son and I both have CIF championship Super Bowl size rings that we'll have forever because, the accomplishment. So it is something that is just, a part of me. And I commend you for the work that you do, not only pouring into these young men's lives, but also the work as a father, because it's important that you still build the relationship with your kids, even though you're away from them a lot. And and that's what leads me to what I'm sharing right now, what leads me to my question, because in the documentary, and for those of you that have not seen the documentary, it's called Undefeated. It's on Netflix. You can go check it out. It's phenomenal. But in the documentary, there's a segment that caught my attention. And it was a segment where your wife addressed, you being more involved with your kids because you were so, you spent so much time on the football field with the guys and you were missing the family. How did that, I want you to go back to that moment and talk about it a little bit, the impact that you have on these guys as football players, but also knowing that your family's going, hey, we're here too.
I have a story for you that I think will sum it up. And again, remember, I'd been at Manassas 7 years and the movie was my last year.
Right.
Before the last season even started, I'd made my mind up that this was going to be my last year at Manassas because I was missing too much of my own children's things and they were getting older. They were starting to get into junior high. And it was time I started coaching them, being involved with them in school. And, the irony was I grew up without a father in my own life. And I full well understand look, my dad held the 100-yard dash record in Tennessee up until 2000 something. He was a starting point guard and starting quarterback from freshman through senior year at East High School, which is where Sybil Shepherd went to school. And it was the big school in town. And he held state records and a number of things for many, many, many years. I know dadgum good and well he saw my name in the paper. I know he knew that and he still chose not to he never saw me play 1 minute of any sport. You cannot believe the insecurity that builds in a young man. You would not, it's one thing if your father can't. It's another thing if he chooses to not, even when he has interest in the things you're doing. And so you start to question your own value. You start to ask yourself, what is it about me that is so broken that my own father doesn't even want to spend time with me.
Mm.
I carried that burden. I'm 54. I carried that burden until I was in my 40s trying to figure it out.
Mm.
And so the irony would be that whole experience is what led me to coaching in the first place. And how ironic would it be that if that experience that led me to coaching somehow in some perverted way had me doing the same thing to my own children. Mm. So it's time to quit. Manassas after 7 years. And so before the season started, I made that decision, but I told nobody. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't tell assistant coach. I didn't tell Lisa. I didn't tell anybody. The last game going into the playoffs, we sat down and ate dinner together like we always did, the six of us. And I looked at Lisa, I looked at the kids, and I said, "Hey guys, tomorrow's the playoff game. I really want y'all to come." And they said, "Well, we'll try, but what's the big deal?" And I'm like, "Well, it could be my last game." And they said, "Because if you lose in the playoffs, you're out." And I said, "I really want you to come." And I said, "Because if I lose, I'm done." And they said, "Well, there's always next year." And I said, "Well, I haven't told the team yet. I haven't told my assistant coaches yet, but I'm telling y'all, I'm not going back. And if I lose, I'm done. So potentially tomorrow night could be the last night I ever coach at Manassas. And I would like y'all there if it is." And Lisa looked at me and was shocked. And my son, Will, who is my third kid, he was 8 or 9 at the time. He's sitting right there on my left. We had a rectangle table. Look over him, and tears are streaming down his face. And I said, "Will, what's wrong?" And he said, "Daddy, you can't quit." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because they need you more than we do." When you're engaged in something that has somehow in some sickening way convinced your own children that there are other people that need their father more than they have, it's time to readjust. Mm-hmm. That comment first crushed me. Right. And it was years before I could tell this story without bawling myself. But if there was anything that solidified that my decision to finish my time at Manassas was the right decision, it was that. To think that somehow my actions had convinced my children that I was more valuable to other children than my own was sickening to me. So in answer to your question, it was time for me to go because I had done a poor job of balancing my business, my effort at Manassas, and my own family. And none of it works if your family isn't right. And it was time for me to spend time with my family. And so when you talk about that clip in the movie, when you see Lisa talking about that, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smiling in that clip, but she was very serious. And she even said, "I support what he does. I know it's good and the kids and everything, but there comes a time where your family comes first." And that clip was shot 5 weeks prior to the story I just told you. So she knew. She, as usual, she saw and knew before I did. And when Will said that to me at the dinner table, it simply solidified what her narrative was in the movie and what my decision had been. And that remains one of the most poignant moments of my life because, your family comes first. I mean, your Dad Up podcast. What kind of dad was I being? And I mean, here's the thing. Everybody's writing stories about me. They're making movies about me and what a wonderful guy I was. But the truth was I was failing where it mattered the most. And time to adjust. And we did.
Right. I'm a firm believer. Thank you for sharing that, first of all. I'm a firm believer in the family is the foundation of our lives. So when you have a marriage and kids, that family is your foundation. And the way I describe it is if that foundation has a crack in it, things around the family, meaning your outside business, your outside, maybe, for you coaching, your business, that stuff starts to crumble because there's a crack in the foundation of your family. And the way that you just described that, yes, you noticed that there was a crack that was happening in the foundation and it was impacting other areas of your life.
Actually, Lisa noticed it first.
Right.
And helped me to see it.
Right.
Then my son, he was the x-ray that showed it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you had to make some adjustments. For me, my boys were grown and older. I had coached all their sports, so I was always involved in stuff. And for me, I just felt like I was missing out on my time with my wife. That's what I felt like I was missing. I was tired of being away every single night and not being able to spend. I would come home from practices or games, go to bed. That's what I do. Come home, go to bed, get up, do it again. And that was 5-6 days a week. And I was missing the relationship with my spouse. So for me, it was my wife. I was missing that. And when I told her that I was done after this season, this last season, it was a year and a half ago. I told her, I said, hey, I'm done at the end of this season. She said, well, the season has barely even gotten started. I said, I know, but I already know that I'm done. And she said, oh, you always say you're done. You always say you're tired of it. You want out. And so when that day came and we had our sports banquet and I was given the announcement, my head coach knew because I told him just a few days before. I said the announcement in front of the parents. We left that night and my wife said, you'll be back. And I never went back. And I have to tell you, I miss the guys. I miss the young men that I coached with. I missed the coaches that I coached with. I don't miss everything else.
I get it. And I get it. And listen, there's a reason that the average age of a high school football coach is 33. And that is the correct stat. It is hard work. And for a person who's not in the school every day as an occupation, but also has a business life that they're running to also do that work, it'll make an old man out of a young man quick. And so, but I'm sure you feel the same way. I would never replace a minute of any of it. It is some of the most valuable experiences of my life that I will take to my grave with a smile on my face. But when it's time, it's time. And if it starts, like you say, creating a crack in the foundation of your family relationships, then it's time to adjust. And so I did, you did, and I think everybody reaches a point one way or another that it happens. And, I was fortunate that I got to have my cake and eat it too, because I quit Manassas right as my kids were getting into middle school and high school. And so I got to coach both my daughter's basketball teams. I got to coach my son's football team. I ended up being the assistant head coach of their school's football team, and we ended up winning a state championship. That's awesome. with my sons. That's awesome. So, I got to have my cake and eat it too. Thank goodness Lisa and the Lord opened my eyes before it went too long. Right. But I was close to too long, and it was just time.
Yeah. How special was that for you, having the experience that you had as a high school coach for all these young men that didn't have father figures? How special was it for you to be that father figure for those men?
Oh, this is, if your podcast was 4.5 hours, I think I might be able to answer 20% of that question, but I'll give you, I did not go to Manassas to save anybody.
Right.
And for your listeners who haven't seen Undefeated, the demographics are 0.3% of the people from the neighborhood that surrounds Manassas have a college degree. Fewer than half have an operating vehicle. The demographics, I don't want to sensationalize them, but they are, here's the big one. An 18-year-old male is 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than he is to have a job by his 21st birthday. In 7 years, there was 1 white kid at Manassas and 3 Hispanic kids. The rest were African American. And I went to coach football. I didn't go to save anybody. I wasn't on a crusade. I wanted to coach football, and I coached the kids at Manassas no differently than I coached the kids at my first job, which was a farming, rural, all-white area. No differently than I coached my kids' teams, which were suburban, kind of affluent neighborhoods. I coached them the same way because kids are kids. It doesn't matter what the zip code is at the time of your birth. A kid's a kid, and a kid wants to be held accountable. A kid wants to achieve some success. A kid wants to have fun, and they want to learn some valuable tenets along the way that serve them long after the ball is put back in the cage and you're not playing anymore. And kids are kids. It doesn't matter where they come from. I didn't go there to be anybody's father figure. I went there to coach football the way I coach football everywhere, which is teaching, mentoring, then technique. And when I say technique, football technique, basketball shooting technique, whatever your defense is, your offense. Well, football technique comes third. It is mentoring, it is loving, it is serving, and then it is technique, because kids will do anything for you if they believe you care about them. And so that's what I did. What I did find out throughout the process is most of those kids grew up the way I did. And so the question has always been, how as a white, affluent business owner do you develop such deep, meaningful relationships with a bunch of black kids from the hood? And the truth is, I identify with those kids much more readily than I identify with my own children. I didn't grow up like my children grew up. Thank God they didn't have to grow up like I did, but I grew up more like that. So I understood their fears. I understood their insecurities. I understood their ambitions, even though there's this big, strong shell on the outside of these 16, 17-year-old kids that have to have this shell to cope with and live in the circumstances they come up with. I know that underneath their shell is a whole lot of pain and a whole lot of insecurity and a whole lot of doubt and a whole lot of mistrust, a whole lot of everything. And because I grew up the same way they did, I could identify with that part of the reality, and we could talk about that. And I had some credibility talking about that with them because of where I came from. And I shared my past with them, and they started to share with me. And as a result, I did come, in some instances, kind of a father figure, much like my coaches became that for me. And so, I just believe the Lord put me in the right place at the right time. Most importantly, though, is how much I grew, not how much my players grew as a result of my work, but how much I grew as a result of understanding just how normal the kids in the hood are. They didn't come out of the womb gang banging. They didn't come out of the womb tatted up. They didn't come out of the womb with all the sensationalized crap we see all over the media. They came out of the womb as children of God. They came out of the womb wanting to do something well. They came out of the womb wanting the same thing we all want: safety, security, and an opportunity at life. And when you level the playing field for kids, regardless of where they come from, and you hold them accountable to the same tenets and characteristics that you hold kids accountable from all over the place, and you give them an opportunity and illustrate for them a different way to conduct themselves that would lead to success later, they are no different than the other kids. So the truth is, my understanding of a large segment of our population grew and matured as a result of what those kids taught me. And I became a better dad as a result of them, rather than they become better kids as a result of my dad influence. That's the truth.
Wow. That's awesome. I think I love it. I love that story. And, it feeds into your own kids. I know that they did help you become a better dad for your kids, but what your kids, and not only your kids, but your wife too, what they witnessed in your building of a relationship with these young men outside, that were struggling with their own pains and insecurities, their relationships that you built with them. It sends a powerful message to your own kids and how to love people from everywhere.
Lisa was driving down the street with Molly. She's my second. Side note, Molly played defensive tackle for me through second grade and was nasty. Lisa said, enough. She can't play football anymore. She played AAU basketball on the boys team until fourth grade. She is I believe if you teach boxing properly, there's a lot to learn from it. And so I taught both my girls and boys how to box, and she routinely kicked Will and Max's butt in the backyard. So that's Molly. She was also the homecoming queen.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's Molly. So anyway, Lisa was driving Molly. This is middle schoolish, 7 or 8, in the Suburban. So there was probably 5, 6 girls in the car with Molly. I think they were going skating or something. Anyway, they were stopped at a light, looked over, and there were a couple of tatted guys sweating their rear ends off in the Memphis heat on a jackhammer with, do-rags on, and what you would expect when you see road workers on the side of the road, sweating, working hard, whatever. And a couple of the girls had something derogatory to say. Like, I have no idea what the comment was. And Molly turned around and looked at them and said, those guys are working. Those guys are making a living for their families. Those guys are out there working harder than you'll ever work a day in your life. They aren't robbing anybody. They aren't doing anything wrong. They're working their butts off for their families and doing the right thing. Shut your mouth. Mm. And I am so proud of that.
Right.
I am so proud of that, because if my family grew as a result, if my children's worldview grew as a result of my time at Manassas, starting to understand the basic humanity of people, and that just because we may not come from the same place and we don't look alike or talk alike or even think alike, and certainly mostly don't vote alike, it doesn't mean that we're not all cut from the same fiber. Amen. And my children get that. And if there's I don't know that there's a prouder dad. I mean, forget the state championships and the ACT scores and the college scholarships, all of it. That is maybe what I'm most proud of as a father, is that my children see that in humanity. Yeah. And are wading through the lack of civility and the stuff that's dividing us in DC and in the press, and see human beings for human beings. And if that's my legacy as a father, I'll take it.
Yeah. I love it. I think, and like I said, that the role and the relationships that you built at Manassas was a direct reflection of how your own kids view and see the world and interact with other people, and the way that your daughter stood for something that she believed in and told those girls to knock it off is just proof right there that it is possible to have those connections with people from all walks of life. And, the kids that you dealt with at Manassas grew up with a rough system, a rough life. And you said they had this hard shell on the outside, but there was a lot of pain on the inside. And I think that you being that role model for them, I know that you were just there to coach, but you were that role model for them, that father figure for them. I know that there's a fine line between building a relationship with a young man and also having to be a disciplinarian from a coaching side, and making sure that relationship isn't getting soured in a way that they don't respect you. But those young men respected you.
If kids think you care about them, they'll do anything in the world for them, and you can beat them up as much as you need to beat them up, as long as you love them up twice as much.
Absolutely.
And I've never known kids not to respond to that mantra, regardless of who they are, where they come from, white, black, whatever. That I believe that if you serve the kids you're coaching and they understand that you genuinely care about them, they'll run through walls for you. And once they have that belief set, if they screw up, they'll take the biggest beating up on earth, as long as you love them up as much after. And so I've always coached.
Mm. And let me ask you this, and I want to ask you this because I have a similar story to this question. But do you keep in touch with any of those guys afterwards?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, it's pretty constant.
Yeah.
In fact, one of them is a guest on. Spoiler alert, and I hope your guests will go watch the movie. More importantly, I hope they'll tune into the podcast we launched. But Chavis, who is highlighted in the movie as one of the 3 kids that are really, really documented, he was in jail in high school. Anyway, he is now he started an organization called the North Memphis Steelers, and he has now mentored in the last 6 years over 1,000 boys and girls, and their motto is school first. And he has started a youth program in one of the poorest zip codes in the United States. And he will tell you it's as a result of his time at Manassas and what he learned and saw, and the changes he saw in himself and his fellow players. So, yeah, I stay in touch with lots of those kids. I mean, and I want to, I want to hear how their life is doing. And it's impossible to walk around Memphis and not bounce into a former player once a month. I mean, after 7 years and 300 kids, they're all over the place. And and it's lots of hugs and lots of mutual respect and love and concern and care. And sure.
And your first name is always Coach.
That's it. It's so funny that my kids have told me that our names we don't have any grandchildren yet, but we will be Fifi is Lisa and Coach and Fifi. That's what our grandchildren apparently are going to call us. So I guess Coach is going to be it forever.
Right.
So, which is fine with me. There's a lot worse things you could call me.
Yeah. It's funny. I run into kids now that I coached when they were in, 5th, 6th grade, and they're grown adults. And my wife and I were sitting at dinner one night at a restaurant, and this waiter was bringing us our drinks, and he said, "Hey, Coach." And I look up and I go, "Hey." He goes, "You coached me when I was in 6th grade at it was NJB basketball." And I went, "I do remember you." I go, "Tell me your parents' names." And he told me, and I go, "Yep, I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah, I remember you." So I get that kind of stuff all the time. But it's interesting. When I was coaching high school, I had a player whose mom worked 3 jobs. His dad was not in his life. He lived in an apartment with his sibling and his mom, and she was hardly ever there. She hardly came to anything that he did as far as practices or games. Because she was working. She was a single mom. And he was such a mess. He really was. He was coming to practices every day with a uniform that stunk. It just smelled because he didn't know how to do his laundry, and his mom wasn't around to do it. And my wife took notice of it and said, "You know what? Bring your stuff every day. We'll wash it for you and give it back to you. And then our son will give it back to you the next day." And so we started doing that for him because he just didn't know. And it's funny, he graduated high school, and about a year and a half later, he sent me a text and he said, "Hey, Coach, can I talk with you?" And I said, "Sure, let's chat." So I called him up and he said, "Hey, I'm really struggling. I don't have any direction for my life right now. I'm trying to get into school. I want to play football. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." And I said, all right, let's sit down and we'll meet. And I said, but be prepared because I'm gonna give you some stuff to do and I'm gonna hold you accountable to it. He said, absolutely, cool. So we met for lunch for about 2 hours. This is a year and a half after he graduated high school. He just was not in college. He was kind of floundering. And I gave him some books to read. I had him write down some goals. I had him write down an action plan. I told him that what I was going to do for him. And then I also told him that every single week I'm going to check in on you and hold you accountable to the stuff that I want you to do. And are you willing to do that? If you can give me your commitment that you're going to stick to this stuff, then I'll stay committed on my end. And he said, absolutely, coach. Less than 3 months later, he was playing college football. And I made a call to a couple of friends that I had that were coaches at the college level playing football, coaches for the football. And they said, sure, send the kid out. Let us take a look. And he was playing football. And I checked in with that kid every single week. Hey, did you read this part in the chapter? Did you read this book? Did you get this done? Have you reached that goal yet? What are you doing on for your job? That kind of stuff. And that is why I coached, to have that impact on players, especially after they graduate. And when they come up to me, when they're adults, they're full-blown adults, and they come up to me and say, hey, coach, what's going on? I love it because it just brings back that flood of memories from when they were little kids and I was coaching them. And to this day, it just gives me chills. That's how much I love it.
It absolutely is the payoff to all the work.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to let you go. When it comes to coaching your own kids, you left Manassas and went off and started coaching your own kids at the high school, junior high level. How difficult was that? Because people ask me that all the time. How tough was it to coach your own kids? And I said, listen, my boys knew that when we were on the court, I was coach. When we were in the car, I was dad. So I had two hats, and they understood that. They respected me as a coach. If they didn't, I wouldn't have coached them. They understood that they had to respect me. I'm curious to know how your relationship was with your kids.
Really the same. It was, I'm dad everywhere except on the field, and there will be no favoritism. If anything, I'll be harder on you than anybody else. I was really hard on Molly in basketball because she had a lot of talent and I wanted to squeeze it out of her. And, it was just what you said, coach on the field, dad at home. Don't expect favoritism. And if anything, if it's 50-50, I'm probably going to nod to the person that's not you. And it was because I wanted them to, one, I never wanted anybody to think my kids were ever going to get even a modicum of favoritism.
Yeah.
And two, I can't stand helicoptering and I can't stand daddy balling. I think it's disgusting. And so my kids knew that, and they knew we weren't going to be a party to any of it. And, I was really proud of the way they handled it, So to the point that other coaches and players were like, you might want to ease up just a little,
Right.
Point taken. So yeah, no, I was hard on them, but life's hard and life's full of challenges. And I never wanted my kids to think that, that nepotism was ever going to get them anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, they have to learn when they become adults and life hits them on the chin, they have to learn, they have to know how to navigate through it. And
I will tell you, one of the hardest things was when they did do something on the field or the court that was extraordinary and I was on the sideline, I couldn't rejoice.
Right.
Jump up and say, way to go. I'd have to sit there and be stoic coach, just like I would if any other kid did anything.
Right.
But inside, I was busting with pride.
Right. Yeah. It's the same thing for the opposite. I remember being on the coach. I was an associate head coach. And when my kid was on the court, I had to keep this inside, but I was like, oh man, please don't mess up. Please don't make a mistake. I want you to do well. So I had a little extra fan inside my head, but I have to tell you, it's, yeah, my boys knew it. And knowing that, hey, you have to respect me as a coach. There were plenty of times that at the high school level, I remember this day clear as could be. My son was on the bench. There was a group of 5 guys on the court, and we were losing, and they started to get the losing gap shorter. So we were catching up. We hit halftime, and we went into the locker room. We do our little spiel. We come out of the locker room, and the head coach looks at me and goes, all right, second half, who should we start? And I looked at him and I said, are you crazy? Start the 5 guys that you just ended the half with. They were getting us somewhere. My son was not in that group.
Too bad for him.
Right. Exactly. He looked at me and he said, all right, coach, we'll go with those 5 guys. My son's not my son. He's a player. And if he's not performing, his butt sits, period.
It is.
That's the way it is.
That's how life's going to work when they get in business world or whatever. So
yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, that's how I was. I was a coach, not a dad. And so, but I'll love them all the same. I love them all the same. I love them like my own kids. But yeah, when I'm on the court, I'm coach. Yeah. Listen, I have taken way too much of your time, but I want to give you an opportunity for my listeners, want to look you up, learn a little bit more about you. Best places for them to do that.
So coachbillcourtney.com is my website, at I am Coach Bill on all social, and very important that your listeners hear. About 3 weeks ago, we released a podcast that's been in development and works for about a year and a half called An Army of Normal Folks. And I don't believe our societal ills are going to be solved by DC or by a bunch of fancy people on CNN or Fox using big words nobody understands, but really just an army of normal folks seeing need in their corner of the world and filling it. And so we started interviewing normal folks who've done extraordinary things. The podcast is distributed by Our Heart, produced by Iron Light Labs out of Chicago. It has been a lot of work, and it continues. It released again 3 weeks ago. We have been in the top 20 in the world on Apple since we released. And it is meant to be entertaining and thought-provoking and redemptive, but it is also meant to be inspiring. All of our guests share their own personal information. I share mine. Our producers share theirs, so that if anybody is inspired by a story they hear and they think, I have those talents, I can do that in the community, there's an army of normal folks at their disposal to reach out to understand how to do things in their community. A lot of people are inspired by stories. A lot of people think, man, I'd love to do something, but they don't know how to start. Mm-hmm. And so we are trying to not only produce an interesting, thought-provoking, fun to listen to podcast, but also a movement as a result of it that's just a grassroots movement of normal folks doing good things in their community. It's called An Army of Normal Folks, and you can find it on normalfolks.us. So coachbillcourtney.com, at I am Coach Bill, normalfolks.us. If you want to hear more, there's more. And last thing is, thank you for having me. And I do not take myself that seriously. And it's incumbent upon me to do these shameless plugs, but I'm uncomfortable doing them because it's talking about myself. But there they are. And I hope your listeners will watch Undefeated and tune into An Army of Normal Folks.
Yeah. Awesome. Coach, it has been a pleasure to have you on, a pleasure to meet you, to get to know you. I certainly hope that our friendship continues to grow. Look forward to checking out not only your podcast, but also the book as well.
Yeah, Against the Grain is the book. And you particularly would love it.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna. You have it on Audible. I saw it on Audible. So
It is. It's hardback, soft copy, Audible, all of it.
yeah. So I'm definitely going to be checking that out.
Cool.
But I appreciate it. And listen, guys, for those of you that are listening, watching, wherever you are, make sure you guys check out his website. Check out the movie. It's awesome. It really is a good movie. I've already told my boys they need to watch it. But make sure you guys check it out. Get the book, and then his podcast. I'll have all the links in the show notes. But again, a big, huge thank you to Coach for being on the show. Really appreciate you. And if you have not yet subscribed to my show or his show, make sure you guys do that. Again, the links are in the show notes. But as always, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Data. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.